When I first thought and heard I had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, it was quite a shock. I was only 51 at the time and really wasn't expecting a positive result.
I remember kind of a sinking feeling, and I was stunned, I think, really. I just didn't know what to say. I had heard of people getting cancer before, but it certainly had never happened to me, and I was in shock.
Well, fear and like a huge jolt.
A sense of shock, disbelief, and fear. All three wrapped up into one.
And then when it came time for my diagnosis, it did come as a surprise because I was being checked every year, not only with the rectal exam, but also with PSA, because my father had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, aggressive, and it had a very high PSA count. I was with him when he was diagnosed, and they told him that he had 3 to 6 months to live. And that was pretty devastating. So we talked, I told him how much I loved him and told him I probably hadn't told him enough, even though we were very close. So that was another moment of a lot of tears.
This is something I totally did not expect. The reason being is the fact that I had had 2 biopsies. The first biopsy, they could find no cancer cells. The second biopsy, they found 1 specimen with cancer cells. I was prepared to receive positive information the second time around. That didn't happen. So I was devastated.
My initial reaction was something else was wrong with my prostate. It wasn't cancer. So I didn't think very much about it, but then as I went through the various other tests, I guess the realization came gradually that I had cancer. And so it built up gradually. It wasn't something that hit me between the eyes.
When I got back out to my car, I mean, I just sat there for a few minutes and just sort of tried to, take deep breaths and calm myself down and rationalize it.
And then, as per my initial reaction, to me it was a challenge. So my reaction was, well, what do I have to do to get rid of this? And what are my chances of getting rid of it? That was my initial reaction.
The way I describe it to people is my worldview contracted from, I think most of us like to think maybe we have a 5-year kind of plan in our heads at any given time, in 5 years I'll be doing this, or in 5 years I'll be doing that, or I might retire or go to Europe or whatever. All of a sudden my worldview just sort of collapsed to what I call the next doctor's appointment.
How's my family going to handle this? What's my wife going to do and think?
I saw it as a challenge as opposed to a problem, and like most challenges in my life that I've been able to overcome, I thought this is just one more. It just happens to be a little more internalized than some of the external problems I've had to deal with in the past.
Basically sent me into a kind of a tailspin, I guess is what I would say. A complete tailspin of activity. Do we tell the kids? Do we not tell the kids? Do I tell my dad?
How long have I got to live? Those were some pretty major questions, as well as how bad is the cancer? I never even knew what a prostate was back then. And the only reason I had the test done is because a friend of ours, who was father of my wife's employer, he had his prostate done and had his PSA done and kept insisting that I have mine done. And it was through that insistence and my wife's prodding that I finally said to the doctor, look, this is my $25, because that's what it was back then, and I want to have this test done.
From the time I turned 50, my doctor, bless his heart, said, Mike, you've turned 50, and I want to start, you should have your blood tested for PSA. It's not covered by OHIP. It's an extra $30 out of your own pocket, but you should do it every year from now on. And he recommended that I do it, and I followed his advice. And you know what? It saved my life.
My doctor used the digital rectal exam, and she said, I feel something and I'd like you to go and have that investigated. And so I otherwise wouldn't have known. So the diagnosis was picked up, or at least the early diagnosis was done by a routine DRE.